have a feeling that the traffic outside is horrendous, so there may be people drifting in as we go, but we'll cope. We'll cope with that. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this session on do we still trust the internet? I suppose there's an assumption there that we ever did, but we have got a fantastic panel here to begin our discussions, but we're also very much counting on you as the audience to get involved in the discussions at an early stage. We're going to run until 7 o'clock tonight. My name is Emily Taylor. I'm an Associate Fellow at Chatham House and editor of the Journal of Cyber Policy. And we have three wonderful speakers here this evening. First of all, I'd like to introduce Marina Kaljurand, who is the former Estonian Foreign Minister. She is a career diplomat and a lawyer as well, and has also been an ambassador of Estonia to many countries, including Israel, Russian Federation, Kazakhstan, Mexico, Canada, and the United States. She has been, as part of her role with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, she has been part of the UN Group of Governmental Experts, which is a process that's been running for quite some time, and I think you've been part of that since 2014, and so I'm hoping we'll have a bit of an update from you on that. And also is co-chair to the Global Commission on the Stability of Cyberspace. And I'll just run through, before we ask you to take the floor, I'll run through our other speakers as well. We have Dr. Patricia Lewis, our very own research director at the International Security team at Chatham House, and has had a variety of former posts, including Deputy Director and Scientist in Residence at the Center for Non-Proliferation Studies in Monterey, was a Director of the UN Institute for Disarmament Research, and also served with Hans Blix as part of the Weapons of Mass Destruction Commission between 2004 and 2006, which must have been a very interesting time. And then I'm very pleased also to welcome Sally Wentworth, who heads up the Internet Society's public policy activities. She is formerly a public servant, assistant director for telecommunications and information policy in the Office of Science and Technology Policy at the White House. That must have been quite some challenge to fit on the business card.
Absolutely.
And was also the principal policy advisor on internet policy issues at the Department of State in the United States. So that's our panel. And we're also here I should also say that these discussions will be on the record this evening. So with that, Marina, it's our great pleasure to have you here this evening. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you for the very kind introduction, and I'm really honored and privileged to be on the same stage with these ladies. And I have to say that it doesn't happen often that there are women discussing cybersecurity. So I very much hope that men from the audience will jump in with their remarks, questions, and comments. Yes, I come from Estonia. It's a country that is dependent on internet. It's the country that has majority of its life on the internet, which is the country that can't imagine online services, online voting, digital signatures without the internet. So that's why the questions of free, open, accessible internet and cybersecurity have been always high on political agenda in my country. So in my remarks, I would like to talk about two things: international cooperation and multi-stakeholder approach. International cooperation, if you remember the attacks of 2007, which were the first attacks in the history of mankind against an independent sovereign state for political reasons. One of the lessons that we learned then was, if we want to have global, secure cyber stability, then we need international cooperation. We need international cooperation on global level, we need it on regional level, we need it on bilateral level, all levels. So yes, I have had the chance to represent or to be part of the United Nations discussion on cybersecurity in the form of GGE, which is 3 letters for a very, very long name of the group of governmental experts. But yes, we were mandated to look into cybersecurity from the perspective of international peace and security, which means that we did not discuss internet per se, but we couldn't avoid it. We didn't use the word internet because internet governance and questions like that were outside of the mandate. But what I can say after the discussions that we have had in the United Nations is that the ideological division we see today in the world is becoming bigger. 2017 was a year when 25 experts representing different countries, different political systems, could not agree on a consensus report. And that is something that is worrisome, and that is something that does not make anybody happy about that. So I have to be frank and open that we could make progress on 4 subjects: new threats, confidence building measures, capacity building measures, norms, political norms of responsible state behavior. We could not agree on applicability of international law. We could not repeat what was agreed in the United Nations already in 2013, already in 2015. And that's a pity. But we have to take forward what was discussed on the stability of cyberspace, on protection of critical infrastructure. As I said, not using the word internet, but ICTs enabling. So from there, I would go to multi-stakeholder approach. I would argue that for the first time in the history of mankind, states and governments can't alone deal with cybersecurity. For me, it equals to free and open, global, accessible internet. If I might draw a parallel, then maybe it's like internet governance that started like a subject delivered by and handled by a group of academicians, a pure technical subject, which has grown now much wider. Cybersecurity has been a domain of governments. But at the moment, as there is not enough political will for governments to continue or to deliver something specific in that field, governments have to look at multi-stakeholders. When I say multi-stakeholders, I mean industry, private sector, civil society, IT community, all of them. And here I see a role also for a group for Global Commission on Stability of Cyberspace, an international platform that was launched 9 months ago in Munich at the Munich Security Conference, which has 27 commissioners. One of the commissioners, Olaf Kolpan, sitting here in the room. I'm proud to chair the commission, and our commission has stepped in, not to replace UN institutions, not to replace any governmental institutions, but to look into the subject of cybersecurity, stability, open and free internet at the time when governments, for political reasons, have taken time off, if I might put it politely. So what has our commission done? Our commission proposed a couple of weeks ago our first norm. The commission is supposed to propose recommendations and policy recommendations and specific norms to states and governments that are needed to secure cybersecurity. And our first norm was as follows: without prejudice to their rights and obligations, state and non-state actors should not conduct or knowingly allow activity that intentionally and substantially damages the general availability or integrity of the public core of the internet, and therefore the stability of cyberspace. We decided to start with the public core of the internet. There were difficult discussions during the drafting. I hope that at some point Olaf can look into that, because we started with very philosophical questions. What is internet? Is it a public good? What is it? And we ended with very technical questions. How deep and how specifically should we define? What are we protecting when we say that the public core of internet has to be protected? So, to conclude my introductory remarks, 2016, 2017, for me, went into history as the years of hacking democracy. When I look to 2018, then unfortunately, I see that there is appetite and there is interest in the fragmentation, balkanization of the internet. I don't know whether we can avoid it or not, but I would argue that definitely it's not in the interest of mankind, in the interest of all people.
Thank you very much. Dr. Lewis. Patricia.
So I'm going to talk about our commission in that case, because you talked about yours. So I was on, and Chatham House was the secretariat for, part of the secretariat for another commission which we did with CG in Canada, called the Global Commission on Internet Governance, which is the precursor to your commission. And we came up with the idea of a social compact for the digital society. And we outlined the core elements of that, which one could argue is the public core of the internet that you say, in which we say that there must be mutual understanding between citizens and their state, and that the state takes responsibility to keep its citizens safe and secure under the law, while in turn citizens agree to empower the authorities to carry out that mission under a clear, accessible legal framework that includes sufficient safeguards and checks and balances against abuses. Businesses must be assured that the state respects the confidentiality of its data, and they must in turn provide their customers the assurance that their data is not misused. There's an urgent need to achieve consensus on a social compact for the digital age in all countries. And I think that this is really at the public core. This is the agreement that we must have between all of us. So when the internet first started, and it grew, as you rightly say, from a community that I was part of in the nuclear physics community into something that was a fantastic resource for those of us working in exchanging information, exchanging papers, connecting with each other in a completely different way, and forming a neural network, if you like. And then the idea of it spreading and becoming something for everyone, and building on how everyone was already using emails, and creating this network that then the World Wide Web was able to sort of superimpose itself on and create what we now think of as the web and the internet, almost as if they were the same thing. And it has connected us, and it has provided us with information that we never had access to before. And one of the things I think about our digital natives, as we call them, those who've grown up with the internet, is that their brains are brilliant, because they don't keep all the extraneous information in their brains that they thought that we had to learn by rote and things like that. They can just access it. So they've got a second brain, not the brain that's wrapped around their stomach, but a brain that's separate in their iPhone, or a brain that's, on their laptop, or soon in all sorts of other devices that they'll have access to, and much easier. But they are relying on this brain to be trustworthy. So in order to be able to trust in something, it has to be trustworthy. But let's not throw away what is the most amazing resource. Let's protect it and make sure that it is there for us. And I think the thing is that when we're online as human beings, we are as we are. We are still humans online. But as we find out in our own lives that when the rules change, we often change our behavior, right? So I was talking to a criminologist recently, somebody who's an expert in criminology, and he told me that just about everyone breaks the law when they have the opportunity. And usually it's in a small way. And usually it's things like speeding. I'm not looking at anyone in particular, but... or parking. Parking on a double yellow line when you shouldn't. Woe betide anyone who parks in a disabled space, because I'll come after you. But we do behave differently when we think we're not going to get caught. We do behave differently, for example, when it's nighttime compared with when it's daytime. We behave differently in different contexts. We modify our language, for example, when we go and visit our elderly uncle, or we perhaps speak in a different way when we're with younger people rather than older people. So when we're online, we behave a bit differently. So I think that just has to be understood and recognized, rather than try to force everyone to behave in a particular way online. And so we need to create an internet that is for the people who use it. And I always think about the internet as being a garden. And it's a garden which requires a lot of tending, but it's a garden with lots of different areas. There's areas of shade, there's areas of bright sunshine, there are pathways, there's public spaces, there's private spaces, and there's always something a bit nasty in the woodshed, right? And there are ducks on the water, all of that. And I think if we think about that and we think how we can create that as a public space for everybody to be able to use, from young through to old, I think it's a much better way to think about it. So we've got to make it safe and secure, which are two different things. In some languages, it's difficult to discriminate between those two concepts, but it is slightly different. We've got to make it reliable, and I think that's one of the big issues for people. How reliable is it? Not only reliable in terms of whether you can access it or not, but also reliable in terms of the information that it gives out. I mean, if you go to a particular search engine and you only get a small percentage of the available information, that is not reliability. And people are beginning to, look for other ways of finding information as a result. But it has to be accessible primarily to everyone. I think, Sally, you're going to get into the issue of net neutrality, which is, the decision today, but it's a big worry that we have. So I think in the end, what it does come down to is whether or not we can trust the internet. And I think that's got a lot to do with the way we think about trust in our societies. So in some societies, there's a high relationship of trust between the government and its people, and I suspect in Estonia that's true. And in other countries, there's a very low level of trust between the people and the government, for good reason. So in those countries, for example, they might want to use encrypted technologies, but in so doing, they think they're going to draw attention to themselves. And they're frightened to, even though it might protect them, they're frightened to actually to use them. And how do we create an internet where those people in countries where their governments literally cannot be trusted, they are not trustworthy providers of the internet, how do we provide an internet for them? And I think people who are very tech and very tech savvy are able to get around, they do workarounds, the untrustworthiness of the, if you like, the easily accessible internet. We saw that in the Arab Spring. We've seen it in countries like China and Russia, where really people who really know how to do it can find a way around the restrictions, find a way around the surveillance and the snooping. But ordinary people can't. I was in a country once that has very severe restrictions on what you can see and can't see, and I found that, for example, I couldn't look up anything that might have shown me a bare arm or a bare breast. So if a woman's looking to find out about breast cancer, for example, she might not be able to in that country, because unless she knows how to get around those restrictions, she won't be provided with that information. So I think a lot of it is cultural, what worries me at the moment is that we seem to be, instead of bringing people up and raising ourselves up together, we seem to be going down more to the bottom and thinking, well, if that country is going to do that, then why the hell don't we? If there is no trust and security there, why should we provide it anywhere else? And I think that really worries me. So I think that governments need to provide security, and security and privacy are two sides of the same coin. If you need to trust in your privacy, you need to have really good security. And so to me, that's all about providing the right sort of protection for people on the internet. And that's where I would like to see this discussion going.
Thank you very much. Before turning to our next speaker, Sally, I would also just like to acknowledge and thank very much the Internet Society for your support and great collaboration this year, and it's great to have you here. I'd also just like to do a little trailer for our latest issue of the Journal of Cyber Policy, which we've done in partnership with you. I think we have one or two of the authors here in the room this evening. There are some copies upstairs, so please do take one if you can. And if they're all gone, it's open access for this whole month. So I just thought I'd just interject with that.
Can you talk about the competition?
Oh, yes. Well, it's your competition, Patricia.
It is.
So there is Patricia has found a deliberate error, it may be a deliberate error, on the cover. Here's a clue. It's in the word search somewhere.
Yeah, so every issue has got a different set of words in the green words around the I. I don't know if you've noticed that. But every issue is different. And this issue has got a load of different words. But there's a deliberate mistake, and we're offering a bottle of champagne. We'll give you till a certain time in the reception. We'll announce it if someone comes forward with where they can find the deliberate error.
So that was a little bit of a detour, but Sally, we're delighted to have you here this evening, and welcome to Chatham House, and look forward to your remarks.
Well, and thank you. And I've already gone a little cross-eyed trying to find the error, but I haven't found it yet. I would first just like to start by also thanking Chatham House for, I think we've had this wonderful partnership over the last year, and it has certainly opened us up to a new audience and a new environment, and given us a chance to wrestle with some difficult issues alongside Chatham House, whether we were talking about the implications of the internet for society, or this tussle between technology and law enforcement in the space of encryption. These are issues that are front and center to the future of the internet, and we think that Chatham House and the environment that you provide is a real opportunity to wrestle with some of the issues, the leading issues facing the internet and all of us who care about it. So thank you for that. At the Internet Society, we have a long and deep history of and commitment to the core values of the internet, which both of you have spoken about very eloquently. We believe in an open network of networks that's global, that creates opportunity for people, that drives innovation and creativity around the world, regardless of frontier. And it provides a space for people to express themselves safely, securely, with trust. And I think we are finding ourselves at a moment in time when all of these values seem to have been put back on the table to be re-examined. And I think we find this particularly right now in this country, in the United Kingdom, in my country, in the United States, and elsewhere, where we're really challenging this notion of, is the internet really good for us? I mean, all these questions about democracy and the implications of technology for public discourse and society are things that we should and appropriately wrestle with. Am I safe? Am I secure? Is my data being protected? Do I even know how it's being collected and by whom? These are all questions that are on the table by users and being discussed by individuals in ways that would not have happened even a year or 2 years ago. And so I think that we should step back and remark on the fact that that is healthy, that we shouldn't shy away from those conversations. And even though we at the Internet Society will advocate strongly for the internet, we are not going to shy away from the difficult questions that I think we need to collectively answer. On the security front, it's an interesting evolution of the discussion. The discussion around cybersecurity for a long time was very isolated between governments in one space talking, and it was very much a nation state to nation state, almost warfare, shutting things down. And we still see that, certainly. And then the sort of technical commercial discussion about data integrity and securing the infrastructure and all the things that need to be done to create a secure online experience. And these discussions were over here, separate from each other. And what we've clearly understood now is that that is not realistic, it's not appropriate, and it's not productive. It doesn't move anything forward, as Marina pointed out. When you only have governments in the room trying to solve things that inherently affect end users and the private sector and all of these communities, it's a very difficult conversation to have. And so we do think that organizations or groups like these commissions are incredibly important in moving the conversation forward and giving us a new way of thinking about these things. And I think for us, it's important to not lose sight in all of this of the implications for the end user, right? And sometimes when we get into a debate over national security or over big trade agreements, for example, it's very easy to get the big players in the room, the important people, to sit around a table with some notion that they're going to solve things. And when you have something like the internet that is so global, so integral to all parts of our lives, I think we have to take a little dose of humility in terms of how far those kinds of conversations can go. This year, the Internet Society, shameless plug, but we turned 25 years this year, and we took the opportunity to do a report with our global community and partners on where the internet might be going. And I think when we started, we thought maybe we would have an epiphany and just declare where the internet was going. I think very quickly we realized that that was not humble. And what we came up with instead was some potential futures of what we heard from the people in our community. And it was very enlightening. At the same time we're writing this, all of this news is coming out in the United States and Europe and elsewhere of all the sort of the terrible things that are happening alongside this technology. And to get on calls or in meetings with the youth part of the Internet Society or our African chapters, and to hear from them not the cynicism, not the terror, but the opportunity, right? The comment was, the internet is life. The internet is our opportunity space. All these decisions that you think you're taking, you'd better not lose sight or foreclose those opportunities from us, because we're getting online now. We are the digital natives. We are the future of this technology. So I think in all of these conversations, we have to keep that in mind. But they also expressed a real fear. They expressed this fear that as this security conversation comes together with the more sort of technical discussion, that the individual liberties, the freedoms that they have come to expect are going to be compromised away in the name of security. And they see this happening in their own countries all the time. We need to shut down the internet because we have an election coming up. We need to curb WhatsApp because we want to prevent this protest from happening. And these governments are getting more and more innovative in the approaches that they use to secure the internet, to secure the experience, to secure their societies in ways that ultimately undermine the rights and freedoms of citizens. So I think we have to be, take that into account as we deal with these issues of security.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go out to the audience for questions. I'd also like to hear also from Andrew Sullivan, one of our authors. But before I do, while you're all warming up your brains to think of questions to ask our panelists, I'm very struck by, first of all, you, Marina, talking about governments taking time off, to put it politely. I'd love you to expand on the non-polite version of that one. But also, you mentioned about people, both of you, security meaning about people's security. And we do have an all-woman panel this evening. And I'd like you to just give me very quick thoughts about the sort of the online misogyny, the hate. I think you mentioned, Patricia, about this sort of we want to be going high, but we all seem to be dragging each other down. And what do you why do you think this is happening, and what should be done about it? Quick one. Marina?
Well, really good questions, but if to just elaborate on the polite way of saying, yes, what I saw today in the United Nations, what I saw today globally, UN, okay, I'm pretty critical towards UN. I don't think that UN is the best organization, but that's the only thing we have today. That's the only thing we have today. And it's so well positioned to talk to all the countries, because cybersecurity should not be a topic for rich white countries. We can't avoid talking to developing world. We have to talk to them. So that, I don't know, 150 countries who today don't have a clue what cybersecurity is will be also engaged. And I don't see it. I see that when the countries get together, they start reading political declarations about cyber sovereignty, about individual internets, and that's something that really worries me. I don't want cyber 9/11 to happen before countries get together, start discussing constructively, and start agreeing on something, and that worries me.
So one of the things we've come up with that, Marina, is that in other arenas we've had similar problems. And so cyberspace is, if you like, a fairly new technology, but we've had other technologies and other spaces. So one of those is actually outer space. In outer space, there is a real divide between what can be agreed in the security sector and what can be agreed, if you like, in the peaceful uses sector. And so what the UN has done quite usefully is divided up those two arenas and parked, if you like, all of the really difficult security issues into one place where we know we're never going to find agreement fully, unless, you know, suddenly the lion lies down with the lamb and there's an opportunity. Occasionally that happens. And then all the peaceful uses has been put in another arena. And there fantastic work has been done on codes of conduct, on guidelines such as the removal of debris from the outer space orbits, which is a real problem. And so progress has been able to be made on the peaceful side, and while progress that can never be made, if you like, on the conflict and military side has not then sort of dragged back the peaceful side. And I think we could do something similar in the international cyberspace.
Just briefly, if I may, to Patricia, I don't think we can do that, because in cyber we already see the hybrid. We already see that cyber is being used together with kinetical weapons.
So
I don't know.
Space.
I know we had war in Georgia where people died.
Yeah.
So cyber is being used on an everyday basis. We can't waste time on thinking about new codes of conduct. We have to look into what we have today. We have international law. 2013 we agreed international law applies to cyber. We have to start looking into that. Writing something new, it's the future. We have to do today what we have, and in the frames we have to avoid grey zones.
I don't think we should go into grey zones, but I do think we need to be thinking about the future as well as today. It's no good just thinking about today. We also have to be thinking about the future and laying down things for the future. And we can walk and chew gum at the same time. That's something women can do.
Agree. Sally, did you?
So you asked the other tricky question in terms of, I think, the behavior towards women online, and I think you said the online misogyny and hate. And if someone, I think it was Vince said it, Vince Cerf said it recently, you know, he imagined that a society would emerge out of the internet. And in any society that emerges, there is the good and there's the bad. And I think we see that certainly happening in the internet society, in the internet community. And it is devastating, and I think we shouldn't underestimate the power that words have when written and or spoken against people. It is profound. And I think it's probably happened to all of us in one form or another on this stage. On the other hand, trying to be an optimist, this year we identified 25 under 25, the young people, 25 young people under the age of 25 who are changing the internet in their countries. And several of them were young women who are using the internet to teach women's health in countries where it is not discussed or common, to create a space where women can fight back against domestic violence, to turn what could be a very negative experience to empower women. And I think amidst the hate and the challenges that come with that, I guess I look to those young women who are not willing to be silenced, are not willing to be put back in a corner, and who are just going to keep forging ahead and demand equality and all the things that are due.
Thank you very much. Who would like to ask a question? Goodness, right. Okay. Okay, and I've got Andrew as well. I'm going to take a question from you, sir, and then I'm going to come to you, Andrew.
Okay, thank you very much. Toby Harris, House of Lords. I'm interested in this urgency question, which Marina has just alluded to. The exam question of today's discussion was, do we still trust the internet? My slight concern is that we trust it too much. This morning I sat in a meeting of an organisation I chair, which is looking at the way in which people are scammed by fake goods. They recognise fake goods as not being real when they see them on a market stall, but if they see them on Facebook or on Twitter, they buy them, and the scammers get rich. We've had a bombardment of fake news, as the President of the United States likes to call it, from all quarters, perhaps undermining electoral processes, warfare by other means going on. We have people who, when they search for prostate cancer or breast cancer on the web, end up being bombarded with information suggesting that there's some magic herbal cure and that you should avoid any form of conventional medicine. So actually there is an urgency about this at all sorts of levels because people are too trusting. I'd be interested to know what the panel think could actually be done in the short term as opposed to the long term when we'll all grow up and realise how we need to use the internet.
Okay. Hold that thought. Andrew, have you got a microphone?
Sure. So my name is Andrew Sullivan, and actually it's an excellent question. And I don't speak for anyone, by the way, which is my usual condition. This is an important question, I think, that was just asked, and I want to pick up a little bit on something that Sally said a moment ago, because there's really a grammar problem here. If you think about the internet, we talk about it, right? And it looks like a noun, like the table, but it's really a mass noun, like the traffic, right? The traffic is bad, or is the traffic good, or whatever. And we did a bad sales job with the internet. We sold it as a thing, something that people can go and it's one place and so on. And what's happened here is now we have this difficulty where people who are experiencing what really amounts to an environment are asked to either trust it or not. Make a decision. Do you trust the internet? Well, do you trust the world? I don't know. For what purpose? When I go into a shop, I think this is an excellent analogy. When I go into a shop, well, I sort of look around. Is it a sketchy place? Does it seem to be in the high street with all of the expensive rent and so on, and it's got the logo on the outside? Well, it's probably a real shop. Or else they got a very expensive scam they're running. Whereas on the internet, there's really no difference between the scammy place and the expensive place and so on. You can't tell the difference. And so I think the key and the direction we have to move is to give people those kinds of cues in the environment where they're online. There's no way to do that right now, and I think that this is part of the key to solving most of these problems, to give people the kinds of clues. When you're walking through a sketchy neighborhood, oh, well, look around, or, don't give them your credit card, or, don't hand it over and keep your eye on it. And that's a sort of important facility that you have as a human. If you're complete naive, right, if you're a child, you don't know how to do that yet. And as you grow up, you learn those things, sometimes painfully. And I think that this problem is that our entire world is experiencing that same growth. Where we're learning about how things can be abused in a culture that is growing along with us. So I don't have a magic solution for the short-term answer. To a certain extent, I think this is the kind of pollution that causes us the opportunity to say, oh, well, now we understand what this pollution is, and then we create social responses to that. But we talk about the internet right now as though it's another place, as though it's another thing outside of our society. But it just isn't anymore. And we're going to have to learn as a culture how to interact with this thing. But we don't want to kill it. And that's actually the thing that I'm most worried about, that we're going to kill it instead of fixing it.
Well, it's like the Steve Wozniak famous phrase,
exactly.
never trust a computer you can't throw out of a window. Well, we can't really do that with the internet anymore, and it is ingrained in our society. But so, to Toby Harris's question, are we actually trusting the internet too much? And the idea of, how do we get our street smarts, if you like, awful phrase about develop those sort of intuitions online?
I wonder if I can just throw out a question to everybody. At what point, how much responsibility do the websites have and the companies that run them? So let's take, one of the marketplace websites. We can think of eBay as being a typical example, but there are many others, right? So they do have responsibility, actually. And they do actually have a mechanism when you buy something and it's not as advertised. You can let them know, and they can try to negotiate a refund. It doesn't always work. There are real problems with it, but it's not very different from buying something in their shop and it not being quite what you wanted, and you have a certain amount of time to take it back. So they've taken that responsibility in the mechanism, and I would say, companies like Airbnb do something similar with the assurances that they provide. So the question that we always have, and this is the issue, I think, is, what responsibility do the social media websites have? Are they content publishers? Do they have responsibility for the content on that people are putting on? And I think people would feel really uncomfortable if they were in any way censoring the content, but they could be helping to modify behavior. I'm just thinking about, if you go to a forum where people are debating Hyde Park Corner or the Houses of Parliament, there is a modification. There are rules and there are ways in which you can behave and can't behave. There are things you can and can't say. And we could start to try to say, well, these are some of the, if you're going to participate on this, this is the way you need to behave. There are certain behaviors which are actually not acceptable for this particular social media.
And who makes those rules? I mean, is it down to the social media platforms on their own?
Well, I think that's the challenge. So it's been fascinating to watch. A number of years ago, if we'd had this conversation, I think the social media or many of the sort of intermediaries would have said, not us, we are intermediaries, and we have no role in this conversation other than to transmit the content from the provider to the user. That is what we do in whatever package we send it to you in. That is no longer the stance. I think that stance is starting to shift, because it is the case that these are platforms that are huge parts of our society, and I think are starting to see some responsibility that goes with that. I don't think that it's a good business proposition to be the purveyor of fake news. I don't think that that's in anybody's really long-term business interest. But at the same time, I think we as a group of users have to be careful about ceding too much power to these companies to make those decisions, right? I do think a multi-stakeholder, a set of norms, some sort of compact, however we want to package it up, we have to decide what's acceptable and what we are looking for, what is our demand on this, rather than just ceding it over to a big commercial entity to make that decision for us. This is no longer just a marketplace, but they are part of our social debate. I think the last thing I would say, though, is there's a tendency in these conversations to put the responsibility on all these parties, which is fine, but I think as end users, we have to take a piece of the responsibility. And I think digital literacy, we should not underestimate the importance of that, the importance of giving people tools or developing tools where they can make smart decisions online. It is no longer simply responsible to just hand your credit card to any website or to click on every email that comes in from an unknown sender. I think we have to do better as end users in taking some responsibility for what happens. Having said that, I mean, the tools can be overly complicated for the average user, and there's, you know, it's a hard thing. But whenever I'm in these conversations, I at least like to put the plug in that we own a little bit of this.
Thank you. Marina.
Just very briefly on the question you raised, for me there are two sides. There is information out there in the internet, like Patricia and Sally said, but at the same time there are online services where governments have obligation to secure security of the integrity of data, security of exchange of data, authentication of people. And here comes the question of trust. As I said, I come from a country where we have 3,000 online services. Government can't impose it on us. We're doing because we trust government, and government has promised to make these services secure. So far, government has not cheated on us. So we still trust our government. So there is information out there where we have to be smart to understand what is fake, is not, what's not. And there are online services where governments have responsibility and have to take the responsibility.
Thank you. You, sir, and then I'm going to take 2 or 3 questions. So I'm going to go to you, and then you, ma'am, and then you, Maria. No, I'll try and get back to everyone.
I'm Uygar Kılıç. I'm a member and freelance marketing consultant. My question is, will the decentralized internet will resolve the problem of trust? Because if it's when it is based on blockchain, everything can be traced back, and even a fake product can be seen that it's fake. What do you think?
Thank you. So there's blockchain, and Louise. Okay.
Louise Bennett. I think one of the key things is that we're in a moment now where parents don't necessarily know how to teach their children how to behave online. And I would particularly like to bring up the question of how that's done in Estonia. I was there this summer at the Eurodig, and I've been talking with people at the University of Tallinn about some of the education programs. And while in the UK we're developing better education in computing, we're not dealing with what I would call the moral and ethical side. But there's a very good program in Estonia on critical thinking for children at primary school age, as we would call it here. And I think it's very important that that type of thing is taken forward so that people understand how to be safe online, understand who to trust. And I'd like you to tell us a bit more about that.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to... I had Maria next, didn't I?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Maria Farrell. I've seen over the last couple of days a couple of headlines about NATO officially and publicly declaring that it is going to start using cyber offensive capabilities, I presume against NATO's, what's the nice word for this, unprepared states. And that's clearly, I mean, I don't think it's perhaps a difference in activity, but it's certainly a very different public stance. And so I wonder what the panel's view is in terms of how do we still trust the internet when it is quite publicly a vector for offensive capabilities.
Okay, so very quick, we don't all have to answer everything, but we've got something about, is blockchain going to save us? Could you tell us about education and learning critical thinking in Estonia, and also about NATO and avowing cyber offensive capabilities? Who wants to go first? Should we do Estonia and teaching?
Yes, thank you very much for raising it, because yes, I very much agree with you. Governments have to provide the possibilities, opportunities of taking advantage of the ICT capabilities, but also talk about, as we call it, cyber hygiene. So yes, we started a program for our first graders. We wanted to start at an early stage, but you can't reach out at an early stage. Not all kids are going to the kindergarten. So the first time we get all the kids together is the first grade. So it's cyber hygiene, it's programming. Schools have free hands. Some schools have introduced special subjects. Other schools are discussing cyber hygiene when discussing other topics. But yes, we think it's crucial. Cyber hygiene being taught, not only to kids, but also my mother is 92, she's Skyping. She also needs exercises of cyber hygiene. And maybe another quick point on offensive, as Estonia being a NATO member state. I think that it's time to be very frank and open. Yes, we have defensive capabilities. Yes, we have offensive capabilities. I think that so far, when governments were not ready to talk about offensive, that wasn't right, because we had them. We have them, and we're delivering them. What is important? Again, international law. When used, because we have retaliation, we have countermeasures, we have it in international law. We have it in UN Charter, Article 51, inherent right of self-defense. We have all these norms, which means that if we talk about offensive, then we have to be within the framework of international law, and that's the basic line.
Thank you. Blockchain, anybody?
Not my particular area of expertise, but I would use this, as my colleague Olaf just pointed out, there is a very nice piece in the journal about the implications of blockchain for society, for human rights. Might be something to think about. This notion of decentralization, as you pointed out, has been really core to the internet since its earliest days. And it is a theory that allows you for redundancy, resiliency, and I think, to your point, potentially improves the environment of trust. So to the extent that as blockchain develops and is widely deployed, and we see great interest in the technology, particularly in developing countries where it provides a mechanism or a tool to protect records, right? Individual records that aren't trusted to be put in the hands of a government, or there aren't mechanisms to do that. I think there is real opportunity there. So I think it remains to be seen. I think it's still on the horizon, but I think we should be optimistic and take some lessons from the past to see how they can take us forward in a blockchain environment.
Well, I would agree. I would just say that I think that anything that provides authentication, verification, and integrity to data, to communications online, including all sorts of encryption, is in the interests of security, and provides privacy and security, and those two things come together in that. What I would say, though, is that there is no perfect system, and as technology goes on, even technologies like blockchain will be vulnerable. So to rely on them as best you can is good, and it increases security, but there's no such thing as 100% security. And as we go down to more and more powerful computing, particularly as we go into quantum computing, those things will not be as secure. So if you build over-reliance on those things, then you'll end up with a problem. So you need to be continually developing security measures and encryption measures and so on in order to be able to stay ahead as technology develops more generally.
I think we've got time for maybe one or two quick questions. There's a gentleman there and okay. And so I know that there are more people wanting to ask questions. So very quickly from you, sir, and then you.
Hi, my name's Shakib. I run a lot of organisations. So question number one, with the eBay as an example, they've already bypassed eBay by sending an email to the person and pay directly to the bank. So eBay aren't in that transaction, and they're losing thousands on that. So how does an organisation that's brand is stolen, how do you handle that? The second thing is, why can't we, I'm a domain registrar as well, so why can't we have people validated when they buy a domain? So like we have cars, we know that person has a driving license and all the other stuff. So when you buy a license to do business on the internet, we know who is responsible. And the third thing, which is a technology piece, why don't browsers have a right click, like those apps, left swipe, right? We can then say this domain is dodgy. That can get collected electronically, and then we can investigate. We could use machine learning to investigate, or we can, like the fraud team, they can investigate with the police. Yeah. So there's different things that we could do.
Yes to all that. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Agreement.
When do we start?
And you've got a mic. Good.
Thank you very much. A lot of food for thought, so I'll try to be very quick. You made a point about safety and security being different things on the internet. So what I'm curious about is really in terms of the policy making, how do we go about distinguishing between those two things? What does it really mean in the short term? can we ensure that it is safe and secure at the same time? Because if you start encrypting things, you encrypt things for good guys and the bad guys. So what does that really mean for us as a society?
Well, I think those two are nice to set up just very, very final, very quick comments. I'm going to start with you, Sally, and then come round to...
Well, I think what we've hit on, we've covered a landscape in many ways, from the nation state and cyber offensive all the way to the roles, responsibilities of the individual. And I think what this highlights is again, what I said earlier, you used to separate these and they were far, far, far apart. And it's amazing, every conversation it seems that I have like this, they immediately merge together. And a potential cyber offensive action by a country has huge implications for users, for anybody caught in that crossfire. It is not, and the safety, right, of those individuals. So I think it is very hard in some ways to pull those concepts apart. Probably getting some semantical agreement about that is important and useful as well. But we are at a moment, and we are at I think a turning point in the internet where it has gone from being this thing that was over there that we went to and we decided to use, and then we walked away and we went and did something else. And the internet is now with us in our daily lives in ways that were, only imaginary years ago. It is on you and with you and sensing and putting data out, and the technologies are deeply personal. And so we have to wrestle with these issues with a sense of urgency, and not rely on the governments alone to solve them, not rely on industry to make decisions on our behalf by themselves, and to take some responsibility to be part of that dialogue.
Thank you. So I think there's a reason why we're glued to our phones and iPads and things. It's because it's because we are now nodes on the internet. We are individual nodes on the internet. So we are now the internet. I think this is the point. It has moved from being a tool out there, that now we're actually immersed in it. And so I think that's a really important transition. And it is only a small step to the way we start to chip ourselves and things, actually. So in terms of security, I guess what I see, the issue of security about being the issue of data security, which includes data authenticity, data integrity. And it's very important. And, I think when you are robbed, when your identity is taken, or your information is stolen, or if your bank balance, your bank money's taken from it, or that is about security. And now that you can feel very unsafe as a result of that, but that's about security. Now, safety, I think, is something different. And I think what's happened online is that there's a sense of unease. And I don't know if anyone ever has played with an avatar, or gone into some of these different sort of parallel universes and so on, but it can be very disconcerting. Because we're now points on the internet, we are nodes, we are now connected somehow in there. So part of our personalities are in there. So when we're being trolled online, we don't feel safe. Even though we may be physically safe, we don't feel safe. And we also know that it can move quite quickly from being online in that digital sphere to being actually in our homes, on the street, stalkers, etc. So I think that's that feeling of safety, which is a different thing about the issue of security. I might have got that wrong, but that's how it's coming to me anyway. I'm thinking about it.
Thank you. A last word from you, Marina.
Just very briefly on authentication. We all knew the cartoon, yeah? The dog sitting in front of the computer. So it's yesterday. Today we have possibilities, we have means to identify who is online, who is participating in the online services. And the last bit of promotion, look, Estonia e-residency. We are even giving the same right to foreigners. Once we identify you, once we take your data, biometric data, we issue an ID card. And with that ID card, we guarantee that you are the one who's participating in online transactions, banking, digital signatures, starting business in Estonia. So it's doable. And I'm looking at other institutions, other governments to do the same. It's doable.
We shouldn't. Get around Brexit that way?
Yes, I was just also going to ask the same.
Become an Estonian e-resident and start business in Estonia. Come to Estonia.
You heard it here first, folks.
Sounds more and more attractive.
So I think there's a lot more conversation to be had, but we are out of time, and thank you for your patience, and also thank you to the wonderful panelists for their insights and remarks. There's some drinks upstairs, thanks to the Internet Society, so you're all invited. And the champagne, the award will be given to whoever has found the deliberate error.
We'll do the award at 7:30, shall we?
Okay, yes, 7:30. So thank you all very much. Thank you.